October 7, 1944. Somewhere in the intelligence archive of Heeresgruppe G, Army Group G, a German analyst named Hauptmann Erich Stolze was constructing what he believed was an airtight assessment of American armored command culture. He had good material. Captured American field orders, intercepted radio traffic, and the testimony of German officers who had fought against American armor in North Africa and Sicily all told the same story. The Americans managed their black soldiers through a system of layered humiliation that kept the fighting formations separate, the command authority white, and the psychological weight of institutional contempt pressing downward at every level. The assessment concluded that this system produced a measurable drag on combat effectiveness, that the energy spent enforcing hierarchy consumed energy that other armies directed toward the enemy. Stolze was proud of this analysis. It was thorough. It was documented. It aligned with everything German doctrine said about the internal contradictions of democratic militaries. He filed it and moved on. 3 weeks later, in a motorpool outside Arlon, Belgium, General George S. Patton Jr. witnessed something that would make Stolze's entire framework obsolete, though Stolze would not know this for another 6 months, by which time the army he was analyzing had torn through his lines and was standing on German soil. To understand what Patton saw in that motorpool, you need to understand the specific architecture of humiliation that governed the relationship between black soldiers and white officers in the United States Army of 1944. It was not casual. It was structured. It was written into regulations, encoded in assignment policies, and enforced by a command culture that treated the dignity of black soldiers as a variable to be managed rather than a condition to be maintained. Black officers commanded black troops only below the battalion level. White officers occupied every senior command position. Equipment allocation reviews, documented in War Department records from 1943 and 1944, consistently showed black armored units receiving older, less well-maintained vehicles than comparable white formations. And at the individual level, in the daily texture of camp and depot and motorpool life, the enforcement of racial hierarchy fell to white junior officers who understood, correctly, that the army would not punish them for its exercise. The German intelligence community had studied this system with genuine interest. It confirmed a principle central to National Socialist military thinking, that an army which institutionally devalued a portion of its own soldiers had handed those soldiers a reason to perform at that valuation. The logic was clean. It was also the logic that Patton, in his particular and profane way, was about to detonate. Because what the German analysts had studied was the system. They had not studied what happens when one man with 4 stars and a reputation for violence toward his own institutional norms decides, on an autumn afternoon in Belgium, that he has seen enough. The tanker's name was Corporal James Latham, assigned to the 761st Tank Battalion Service Company, and on the morning of October 7, 1944, he was underneath a Sherman tank in a motorpool outside Arlon, performing a track tension adjustment that required a specific torque wrench that he did not have because it had not been issued to his unit. He had improvised a solution, a competent mechanical improvisation that any experienced tanker would have recognized as adequate, and was explaining this solution to a white first lieutenant named Carver, who had stopped to inspect the work. Carver was not satisfied. The account of what followed comes from 3 sources. The testimony of Staff Sergeant Willie Devereaux, who was working on an adjacent vehicle, a letter that Corporal Latham wrote to his mother in Detroit on October 9, 1944, which survived in family possession and was donated to the National Archives in 1989, and the after-action account of Patton's aide-de-camp, Colonel Charles Codman, who recorded the incident in his personal diary. According to all 3 sources, Lieutenant Carver made his dissatisfaction with Latham's improvisation known in terms that had nothing to do with the mechanical question and everything to do with the hierarchy he had been given authority to enforce. He was loud. He was specific. He used language that Latham's letter to his mother described, with careful restraint, as the kind of words that make a man feel like he is not a man. Devereaux's testimony adds that 2 other soldiers stopped working and stared at the ground, not in distraction, but in the specific focused stillness of men absorbing a familiar pain, and deciding again to survive it rather than answer it. It was at this moment that Patton's staff car turned into the motorpool. What happened next was documented by Codman with the precision of a man who understood he was recording something significant. Patton's car stopped. Patton got out. He stood at the edge of the scene for approximately 30 seconds, long enough to assess, not long enough to be seen assessing. Then he walked forward. He did not address Carver first. He addressed Latham. He asked, in the technical language of an armored commander who had been crawling around tanks since 1917, what the mechanical problem was. Latham explained it. Patton asked 2 follow-up questions that demonstrated to everyone present that he understood the answer. Then he turned to Carver. Codman's diary records the exchange in indirect summary, noting that Patton expressed his assessment of Lieutenant Carver's contribution to Third Army's combat readiness in terms that left the motorpool in absolute silence. He then promoted Corporal Latham on the spot, a battlefield promotion that was, strictly speaking, outside the proper administrative channel for such things, and that Patton executed with the serene certainty of a man who had decided that the administrative channel was, at this moment, his enemy. Carver was reassigned within 48 hours. The reassignment went through channels that generated no official paperwork attributing its cause, which was itself a message, because everyone in Third Army's command structure who needed to understand what had happened did understand it. Patton did not issue a memo. He did not schedule a review. He made an example in front of witnesses and then moved on, which was how he communicated policy when he wanted policy to change faster than memos traveled. The German intelligence community received a fragmentary account of this incident through French civilian sources in late October 1944. Hauptmann-Stolz's updated assessment, filed November 3, 1944, noted the incident and classified it as atypical command behavior unlikely to indicate systemic change. This was Stolz's second significant error in 4 weeks. Because Patton had not invented a new system. He had enforced a standard that the existing system claimed to hold but consistently failed to practice. The standard that a soldier's competence was the measure of his worth in a combat formation, and that any officer who confused his own authority with permission to degrade that competence was a liability rather than an asset. The 761st Tank Battalion had believed in this standard for 2 years at Camp Claiborne and Camp Hood. Patton had simply demonstrated in a Belgian motorpool on a Tuesday morning that he believed in it too. What the Germans could not see was how that demonstration traveled. It traveled through the 761st faster than any official communication. It reached soldiers who had not been present in forms that were inevitably embellished but directionally accurate, stories that said, in their various tellings, that the commanding general of Third Army had stood in a motorpool and treated a black tanker as a soldier, not as a category, not as a problem, as a soldier. That this was remarkable enough to become a story is its own kind of indictment. That the story spread the way it did, and that, in the estimation of multiple 761st veterans interviewed after the war, it changed the quality of what those men brought to the line on November 2, 1944, when they first made contact with the enemy, is its own kind of validation. November 8, 1944. 6 days into the 761st's combat deployment. The village of Gbling, France, held by elements of the 11th Panzer Division and a company of Panzerjäger tank destroyers positioned to cover the eastern approach road. The German defensive posture was textbook. The tank destroyers angled to engage American armor at the bend in the road, where speed would drop and exposure would maximize, with infantry in the village buildings to prevent the dismounted work that might otherwise flank the position. Oberst Hans Joachim Deckert, commanding the sector, had conducted this type of defense successfully 3 times in the preceding 6 weeks against American armored formations that behaved as his training said they would. Advancing up the road until they hit fire. Stopping, calling for infantry support. Waiting, losing momentum. Allowing the defense to consolidate. The pattern was reliable. Deckert was confident. The 761st did not follow the pattern. Sergeant Warren Creasy, commanding a section of M4 Shermans, received fire at the road bend and made a decision that Deckert's after-action report described as tactically irrational. He accelerated into the fire rather than halting, moving his section through the killing zone at speed that degraded the tank destroyer crew's firing solution while simultaneously reducing his own section's exposure time. His gunner, Private First Class Horace Evans, put a 75 MRME round through the lead Panzerjäger at a range of approximately 180 meters while Creasy's Sherman was still moving. The shot was not supposed to be possible at that speed, at that angle, against that target. Evans made it anyway. The 2nd Panzerjäger crew abandoned their vehicle and ran. The road to Gbling was open in 11 minutes. Deckert's report noted, with the clipped precision of an officer writing under artillery pressure, that the American armored element had displayed attack characteristics inconsistent with prior American armored behavior in this sector, specifically a willingness to accept short-term vulnerability in exchange for momentum that our defensive doctrine did not account for. He requested updated intelligence assessments on the attacking unit. The intelligence assessment that came back 2 days later included the unit designation 761st Tank Battalion and a notation that it was a colored formation. Deckert read this. He filed it without comment. He was a professional. The notation explained nothing about what had happened on the Gbling Road. The only thing that explained what had happened on the Gbling Road was what the men of the 761st had decided, over 2 years of preparation and 6 days of combat, that they were there to prove. Creasy survived the war. He was awarded the Silver Star. Warren Creasy was 23 years old at Gbling and had been told, in various official and unofficial ways, throughout his military service, that his potential contribution to the war effort was secondary. He had disagreed with this assessment in the specific way that a man disagrees with something he cannot safely argue, by storing the disagreement and waiting for a moment when the disagreement could speak for itself. On November 8, 1944, on a road in eastern France, it spoke at approximately 380 meters per second. The statistical record of what followed the motorpool incident at Arlon is not, strictly speaking, attributable to a single intervention by a single general on a single morning. History does not reduce cleanly to that kind of causation. But the record is clear, and its direction is clear, and the timing is specific enough to demand acknowledgement. Between November 2nd and December 31st, 1944, the 761st Tank Battalion maintained a rate of advance and a consistency of tactical performance that Patton's own operations staff cited in internal reviews as exceeding the average for comparable white armored battalions in the same theater during the same period. The battalion lost 31 men killed and 93 wounded in that 2-month span. It destroyed 68 enemy vehicles, killed or captured an estimated 2,100 enemy personnel, and liberated 14 towns. The cost was real. The performance was undeniable. German post-war assessments of the 761st are consistent in a way that crosses individual testimony. Oberst Deckert, interviewed by American military historians in 1948, was asked specifically to compare the 761st tactical behavior to that of other American armored formations his units had faced. His answer was recorded verbatim. They attacked like men who had something personal to settle with the outcome. Other American units attacked because their orders required it. This unit attacked as though the result mattered to them in a way that went beyond the military question. He was asked to elaborate. He said, "I cannot explain it in tactical terms. It was a quality of intention." He paused. "It is not a quality you can order into existence." Hauptmann Stolz's November assessment, classifying the Arlon motorpool incident as atypical, was revised upward twice before the end of 1944. By January 1945, Army Group G's intelligence file on the 761st carried a red-bordered notation that translated, in the careful language of German military bureaucracy, as treat as elite formation. Here is the counterintuitive truth that Stolz's framework could not accommodate. The act of treating a man as competent, In a context where the institution he serves has systematically treated him as less than competent, does not merely restore his performance to baseline. It releases performance that the suppression had been compressing for however long the suppression had been running. 2 years, in Corporal Latham's case. 2 years of Camp Claiborne and Camp Hood and white lieutenants who confused their rank with a license to diminish. Patton did not give Latham something new. He removed something old. And what expanded to fill the space was already there, fully formed, waiting. The German model assumed that an institution's treatment of its soldiers and those soldiers' performance were variables in a simple equation. Reduce the first, reduce the second. It is not a foolish assumption. It fails only when applied to men who have decided, at some private and unobservable level, that they will not allow the institution's evaluation of them to become their evaluation of themselves. These men are harder to predict. They are harder to defeat. They absorb the diminishment and convert it into fuel that burns in the specific direction of proving the diminishment wrong. This principle did not end in 1945. It operates in every organization, in every era, wherever a system's stated values and its practiced values run at a distance from each other. The gap is where the most dangerous performance accumulates, dangerous to anyone counting on the underestimated to remain underestimated. Patton understood this. He understood it not philosophically but practically, in the way that a commander who needs results understands what produces them. The lesson he applied in a Belgian motorpool on an October morning was simple, and it was devastating. When you treat a man as what he actually is, you get what he actually has. It is always more than you expected.